Next up, I'm going to discuss in-camera processing of JPEGs. Now, as I've discussed before, Fujifilm does an incredible job of producing beautiful JPEGs. They're the envy of the manufacturing world, camera manufacturing world. They are arguably the best JPEGs out of camera. Now, beyond just the film simulation, just the way the actual camera does it, the way it processes the JPEG. Now, there's two ways of doing this. You can either just produce the JPEG in your camera, and I always advise those of you who shoot JPEG only to consider shooting RAW and JPEG. Okay, I think it's very important that you do that. If you can't, from a space perspective, or if it's not something you want to do, at least create a function button where you can change from JPEG to RAW and JPEG very quickly. So you might be shooting away and come across a scene where you know the conditions are too varied, there's too much contrast in that scene, or difference in dynamic range in that scene for your JPEG image. Doesn't matter what setting or dynamic range you have, is going to cope with. In that way, all you do is you push the function button and it goes from JPEG only to JPEG and RAW. Take the shot, turn it off, and go back to JPEG only. At the very least, I would suggest you do that. And that's very easy to set up. And set it up on a button that you can't accidentally hit, because when you're wanting to shoot RAW and you accidentally hit it, you might be back onto JPEG and you don't even realize it, or RAW only, whatever it is. So outside of producing great JPEG images in camera through the settings which I've discussed with you, there's another way of doing this. So this applies to RAW only shooters as well as those who have shot JPEG and RAW. So if you shot JPEG and RAW and you weren't happy with the JPEG that you produced, because you've got the RAW, you have the ability to produce it again in camera afterwards. Or the RAW image alone, you can produce it after you've taken the shot in camera. So it's pretty simple. You just hit the playback button, the image comes up, it's a RAW image. You go to menu while you're in playback and it shows you the playback menu. You'll see RAW conversion, you hit that, and there all the settings are there, that the same settings that you would have had if you were producing a JPEG when you're taking the shot are all there again. You can reflect conditions, meaning you can set it up that the same settings applied that you had in camera when you took it. You can just make minor adjustments, or you can make totally new adjustments, arrange the whole image with a different recipe and film simulation and whatever, and create a brand new JPEG. So this is the advantage of shooting RAW and JPEG, because if you had shot a black and white JPEG, for example, and you didn't shoot RAW, you can't make a color image now, that's gone. But if you had shot a RAW and you weren't happy with the black and white, you just go play back to the color, to the original RAW of that image and create a brand new JPEG straight out of your camera. And I think that Fujifilm needs to, they're such good camera manufacturer. They're so unique in the cameras that they produce. You know where they suck? They suck with their software and their, to a large degree, and their apps. Man, their apps, I don't know who creates the apps at Fujifilm, but they need to get someone different, or at least light a fire under that person's butt. Because seriously, there's so much potential, especially with the raw processing power of the camera, to implement apps and your phone and your iPad into that whole process. That if the drive and the marketing behind Fujifilm is to produce these amazing JPEGs that you don't have to spend hours in front of the computer, then why aren't you giving us more options around that? So for example, you were able to take a USB-C cable, plug it into your phone, your iPhone, or whatever phone you use, and you go and you push the playback, and the image comes up on your cell phone. And when you're making the adjustments to the RAW and the RAW conversion, you've seen the adjustments live changing on your screen through an app that you've downloaded. So when it produces the JPEG, it saves it straight to the phone, or even better, it communicates with the phone and uses the app there and reads the files from the camera onto the phone, and you make all the adjustments, and when you push save, it saves a JPEG back to the camera or to the phone. So you've implemented the screen or the app or whatever it is with the phone to a higher level, where so you can just come off a shoot, put your phone down, plug it into the camera, put your camera down, plug it into the phone, and just use the screen through an app, go through the raw images and produce JPEGs the way you want them to look afterwards. Quick way of doing it. So fast. No computer, no big iPad, no laptop, nothing, just your phone and your camera. And the camera is doing all the heavy lifting. All the processing is done by the camera, not by the phone. The phone is effectively just a screen. I can't believe we haven't implemented that kind of thing yet. I don't understand. It blows my mind, but maybe it's a lot harder. Maybe companies like Apple make it very difficult for companies to be given access to that kind of accessibility to their devices. Maybe you pay a lot of money to Apple to be able to create that functionality where a camera can communicate with a phone to that degree. I don't know. So there might be many reasons behind it, but yeah, really, they got to get the finger out and start improving on that for sure. Okay, going outside of creating JPEGs in the camera, there's another way, and I haven't kind of included it because it requires you using a desktop or a laptop. That is using Ettr Raw Studio, which is produced by Fujifilm. And I said that they suck with software. This is one of the softwares that they've created that doesn't suck too bad. It actually is pretty good, I must admit. Effectively, it's not an editing suite to the degree where you can crop and do sort of heavy editing adjustments. It's the same raw conversion kind of that you were doing on your playback that I've just talked about, but it's been done on a larger screen on your desktop. Again, the camera's doing all the heavy lifting. You've plugged your camera in. It's particular to the camera. So if you've taken images and you've loaded the raw images onto your computer and they X Pro 3 images, you can't plug your X-T3 or your X-T4 in and get the camera to do the heavy lifting on those images and make adjustments. It has to be exactly the camera. It doesn't have to be the exact camera, but it has to be the same model of camera that you've plugged in to be able to do the processing. So this is Fujifilm's Ettr Raw Studio software. On the top left-hand side, you'll see I've plugged in the X Pro 3 because the image I'm working on was taken on the X Pro 3. And below that, you'll see the folder section. Now, wherever you've saved your raw images, whether it be an external drive or internal drive, when you select that folder, the images will appear on the bottom here, which you can scroll between. If you did any picking in camera, marking of any images, those marks or picks will come up and present themselves, and you can actually filter it. Now, below the folder section, you'll see a histogram that's representative of the histogram that was taken or at least recorded at the time of capture. As you can see, I've done pretty well. I've kept my highlights in check and my shadows in check. Everything's within the middle of that histogram, which is what I wanted. Below the histogram is really just the information around the camera, the lens that I use, a serial number, the type of raw file that was taken, like lossless, compressed, 14-bit, sRGB, all those sort of bits of information pertaining to the camera, the file, and lens as well. Moving to the right-hand side, at the top, you'll see a section there called as shot condition. Now, if you had started working on it, which I'll just do an example here. Let me just underexpose it by a stop. Let me change the film simulation to this. Let's just say you had worked on this image for a while, but you weren't happy with it. If you select the as shot condition, it goes back to what was shot at the time. And as you can see on the day, I shot with highlight tone -2 and shadow tone -2, and I shot at the classic neg. Now, the reason why I shot it at classic neg is because I was reviewing the X Pro 3 at the time. RAWs could not be read yet by any software, so I had to shoot JPEG in camera. And I wanted to show classic neg because that was the brand new simulation that had been released with the X Pro. Now, this is where I made the error because I'm I'm only focused on RAW only shooting, and that's all I really, concentrate on. I was just thinking, well, just work the highlights back and also adjust the shadow tone back as well. Get as much dynamic range in the classic neg simulation as I possibly can. If I need to make a few tweaks to it in post-production, I can do that. It's no problem. But what I should have actually done is I should have raised my ISO up to 640, and I would have had DR 400, and I would have got a lot more dynamic range in this image. Now, this particular image is actually not that bad. You can most certainly do with DR 100, which is what it is. And as you can see here where my cursor is, that area has been grayed out. So I cannot access DR 400 because I never took it 2 stops above base raw ISO. And I can never access that. It is what it is because of the way I set it up in camera. So as you can see here, if I flick between the different film simulations, it shows you what it would have been like shooting, because this is using the processing power of the camera. So this is exactly like creating a JPEG in camera. And I have compared them. So I've done the exact same image through the RAW converter in the camera, produced the JPEG, and I did one through this software using the camera, and they are identical. They're exactly the same. So it's very, very cool. So going back to classic neg. So what you can do here is obviously you can set up whatever settings that you want. You can create the look that you want. Once you've done that, you can actually go up to here where my cursor is, and you can save this custom profile. So what your options are is to save it in the actual software under a profile, which I've created here. You'll see X Pro 3. You can save it here. So every time you plug this particular camera in and fire up the software, all those recipes are going to be sitting there, but you have the option also to save it to the X Pro 3. So in your custom sections, customs 1 to 7, whatever it is, let me have a check. Yeah, it's 1 to 7 here. And I've done a few. That was the, if I select that, the image is going to change now. You'll see, obviously it's set to daylight, which didn't really suit this particular scene. And obviously, I would have shot it a little bit differently on the day. I probably would have had the dynamic range increased slightly at least. But anyway, you get the idea. If I select my Fuji Chrome 50, which I've created, which is a preset that I've created, that's the look that comes up. So I actually quite like this, and you can actually see what I've done to set it up. So not only is it found in the software here, really cool is that it's actually found in my Q menu under my custom settings. So I can actually go there, fire up the camera, and C1, C2, C3 will be written exactly like this. Kodachrome, Fujichrome, Ettr Chrome, Xchrome, and I haven't filled 5, 6, 7 at the moment. And you can change that at any stage. So this is what really makes it powerful, is that you can create recipe using a big screen. So here you have the ability to take the raw image, work on them, get the looks that you want. Very powerful part of this is using the white balance shift. And as you can see when I select it, it comes up with the actual shift panel. And I tell you R2 and B -3, and literally that's where the pointer is. So you just got to follow it. It's pretty straightforward. You OK it and it comes up and it's there. Now this is the one I've chosen. So I worked this recipe called Fujichrome 50 until I liked it. Yeah, so very, very powerful, very, very powerful tool. Now, unfortunately, I didn't shoot it to its full potential on the day. A lot of the images that I took in this particular, I'll just show you this one here, one before, Jamal, let me just go back to shooting conditions so you can see how dramatic it was. The skies are really whited out, and Jamal's obviously got that sort of dark skin tone, and that creates that contrast. If you look on the histogram, you can see I'm already losing on the right hand side. I already had the sky that was clipping and the shadows are all the way there, but showing you a JPEG, because I was forced to show you a JPEG on the day. I couldn't take the raw in for editing. I focused on him because it was more important to get detail in his face than worrying about detail in the sky, and that's the limitations you can get. Now again, this is an example of where it would have really benefited of having the DR400. As you can see, it's grayed out over here, and that would have taken that sky as you see it down by 2 stops, which would have brought the histogram right in, and the white of the sky would have been retained. So this is where you really got to pay attention to the particular situation you're in, and reading your histogram and just seeing how dramatic the contrast is in that scene and what you need is vital in making that decision. So if I hit my Fujichrome 50, yeah, you can see how it darkens it up, and then obviously I would just go and I would just raise it by a stop there. Kind of like that. Now, obviously, I'd shot it with RAW in mind, even though I presented on that particular review JPEGs. But this image, if I take it into Lightroom, I'll be able to do quite dramatic sort of edits to it and get it looking the way I really want to. But I was just showing this particular image because it is quite sort of very contrasty, quite difficult to work with. So yeah, very powerful software. I recommend you mess around with it because it actually teaches you a lot about what's happening in your camera. So if you decide you'd want to focus rather on getting it right in camera and not bringing the RAWs into this particular software, then just use this as a way of actually creating your recipes, but also learning how these settings can affect an image. So it'll really give you a good idea. So on the day you can make quick decisions and get the right simulations and profiles out to get the best possible image. Now just remember the Fujifilm X-Raw Studio cannot do what other editing suites can do. You can't crop it, you can't make adjustments to your crop, you can't vignette, you can't brush and remove sort of any marks or any bits of the image that you want to remove. This is purely creating JPEGs. That's what it's designed to do. So at the end of creating whatever you want to create, you hit the convert button, this comes up, saves the image, and boom, that goes back into the exact same folder, which is over here where those images came out. So as you can see at the bottom immediately, there's the raw image there, and right next to it is the JPEG that I've created. So yeah, they're identical, and you can see there, that's the JPEG, that's the raw. what I really like about the Fujifilm X Raw Studio is that I get the ability to actually look closely at what the effects are, like particularly around sharpness, noise reduction, and clarity, these three here. Now, clarity is something new that's been added to the X Pro 3 and the XT4. It's like a micro contrast adjustment. A lot of you might know clarity already from the sliders or the adjustment sliders in Lightroom and other software. It's something that you can, get horribly wrong. It's one of those things that I think a lot of people do overuse it. I don't believe it looks great when it's overused. It's too much, and you really got to be subtle with it. So here's a great way of actually working and looking at it live. And then when you're setting up your recipes for your camera, you get a better idea of what they look like. So you have the ability to take the plus and minus at the top there. Obviously the plus, you can actually zoom in on the image. The way this particular recipe was set up, which is Fujichrome 50, I've minused the noise reduction. So you could actually bring that back to 0 because you can see a little bit of noise coming in there because that's the look I kind of wanted with this particular recipe, but you can just make the adjustment there. Obviously it's cleaned itself up nicely. And you can see the effect that clarity has. It just loads up. You can see how much more aggressive it looks. It doesn't look too bad in this type of image because it is quite a hard looking image, a bit grungy. But I'm just more cautious of it. So anyway, learn your clarity settings, play around with it in the software, give you a good idea when you're making your recipes. Sharpness is another one of those things. It's quite tricky to get sharpness right. You don't want to overdo it. Just have a look at it. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of features here, all the different features that are found in the camera, all the way down to your color space. Even if you're shooting HDR, the built-in new HDR feature in the camera, you have access to it here. You can rotate the image. You can do quite a lot to it. So very, very powerful. While looking at recipes, and it's something I haven't really delved into, I was quite fascinated. There's actually a lot of information out there on recipes and people who put a lot of hard work in. One that comes to mind, and I think is probably the most popular, well-known, is the Fuji Weekly blog. He's done a lot of work around this. He's taken film looks from the past, like Kodachrome and Kodachrome 64, and he's created recipes that allow you the opportunity to create that same look in camera. So when you produce a JPEG, it's closely related to the look of Kodachrome, and uniquely sets the recipe up to match the particular sensor and processor you're using in the generation of camera that you have as well. So a lot of credit to him. I've tried out his Kodachrome one, which I'm not going to include on my information. I'd rather you go to the Fuji Weekly blog and get the information directly from him. It would be wrong for me to share that with you without him getting credit. So go to his blog, have a look at his different recipes, and just try them out. A couple of them, like the Kodachrome, I shot a lot of Kodachrome back in the day. In certain situations, these recipes work, but it's very dependent on the conditions and how, the film didn't behave the same way in varied conditions. In particular conditions, these recipes do a good job, and others they don't. But that's just the nature of the game when it comes to film simulations and recipes. So I wouldn't get too caught up in that, but it can inspire you to make the adjustments of your own. So you can enter that recipe, not be happy with it, and then make like a white balance shift slightly different to what he may, or whoever it was who gave you the recipe did it. You can create your own. I've created 2 recipes. They're both daylight recipes, meaning that they are set to a Kelvin of daylight, or daylight Kelvin, or color temperature. So they're not made for indoors or anything like that. And I've incorporated the recipes in the information section or the description section below. So go check that out. I gave them the name Fujichrome, very unique name. I don't know if you noticed that. I don't think you've ever heard of Fujichrome before. Why did I choose that name? I'm doing a video on Fujifilm Chrome. Who doesn't like Chrome? Like if you see a Lamborghini rock up in front of you, a really amazing car, and you're staring at it, and then a late 50s, early 60s Corvette pulls up next to it, and your eyes just go onto the Corvette because it's just a way better looking car. And why? Because it's got Chrome. You see, they've got to bring back Chrome to modern sports cars. That's what's missing. So it's Fujichrome, and the other one is Xchrome. That's inspiring stuff. So that's going to dramatically change your life. You could probably just use those 2 recipes and go out and start hanging stuff up in galleries. It's incredible recipes. So thank me later. But they're in the description section. You can go try those out. But yeah, just mess around with it. It's amazing. And the fact that you can enter these recipes directly into your camera and you can save them. You can customize them and save them. And added to that, this is where I think, again, Fujifilm needs to really wake up and improve. Why haven't you created an RAW Studio application. Okay, the same, like if the camera's doing all the heavy loading, is it really that difficult to create an app for an iPad, connect the Fujifilm camera to your iPad, and go through the images exactly where you can on your desktop, where the camera produces the JPEGs for you and saves it back to your iPad? I mean, the idea of being able to go out with an iPad or just a phone connected to your camera, that'll be revolutionary. It'll change everything. Because what you can do, this is the way you can set it up. You convert in Xchrome Studio on your iPad using the camera, and you select the folder in which the JPEGs will be imported into on your iPad. Then you set up Lightroom Mobile to auto import from that folder. So immediately as the JPEG has been produced by Xchrome Studio on your iPad or your phone, goes into that folder, Lightroom immediately imports them on auto import and immediately up to the cloud, and it'll be available on all your devices. Also in Lightroom there, you can then go and make the little crop adjustments or whatever you want to do to the JPEG, little tweak here or there, and those changes will be made on the cloud as well. So yeah, I don't think yet we've got to the point where we're really using all these capabilities to the max. And I think Fujifilm, you're missing a trick here. You know, pay attention and get this sorted out. You need to improve on your apps and a lot of your software, because you make the amazing cameras. We all love your cameras and you make amazing JPEGs. You just need to utilize that and do better with your software. And I mean that with love. Don't mean that harshly. I'm trying to help you. And finally, I'm going to talk about post-production software and film simulations. Now, this is where I put the most work into this video. I put a lot of time into this because I had to do a lot of work to get this right. But those of you who shoot RAW and taken images into post-production software, in the beginning with Lightroom, it would apply Adobe profile. Then you had the options. Initially, they only had the Adobe profiles. Then Fujifilm had Adobe obviously present their film simulations in the software, which is great. And I started applying that on import. And then of late now, it automatically, whatever your camera was set to with its profile, it automatically recognizes when it loads into Lightroom. So things like white balance are as they were shot in camera, and film simulation is what it was shot in camera, but all the other settings are zeroed out. So, you know, like highlights and shadows are not going to be shown and things like that. Now, the problem is that most of you who shoot RAW and take it into post-production and use the film simulations know that if you were to shoot an image in camera, create a JPEG with all your settings set to 0 and just choose the film simulation, and you took that into Lightroom, for example, and you set everything to 0 and you just chose a film simulation, the images don't look exactly the same. Meaning the produced JPEG, all right, and if I had to just do that to the image in Lightroom, no adjustments, just apply the same film simulation and produce a JPEG from that, those two images don't look the same. They're pretty close. The histograms are dramatically different, but they're not the same. And it's got to do with the way Lightroom generates a new preview. So you might have seen in Lightroom, you immediately load your RAWs. It gives you quite a dynamic image to start with, and then it, just for a second, and then it shows you a different preview that's a little bit more bland that represents the 14-bit RAW. That little preview that you got a flash of was the one that was generated in camera that's sitting in the RAW information. So the way the preview is generated in these post-production software is quite different to what gets produced in camera. So you can't just presume that 0 settings in camera with film simulation and 0 settings in Lightroom with film simulation when made into a JPEG are the same JPEG or the same look of JPEG. That's not the case. So what I've done, I've taken one for the team here, I've sat through every simulation set to 0 with multiple images so that I get a good sort of testing range and, you know, different types of images, not just one image. And I've looked at the histograms and I've matched up every film simulation as close as I can to what the camera produces if set to 0. So the starting point of that profile is what it would look like if the camera had produced it. Now, some of you are thinking that's just a waste of time. Why did you do that? Probably did waste my time. I don't know why I got on a little bit of a tangent. I thought this might just change the world. Probably not going to change the world, but I'm hoping it can help someone out there. So now by using the presets that I've created, which I'm giving to you, you can hit a film simulation in the preset, not in the profile section, and it's going to create a starting point on that image that closely resembles what the camera's settings would be if you created a JPEG. and then you can make minor adjustments. In addition to making presets of simulations that closely resemble what the camera produces when all settings are set to 0, I've made a DR100, DR200, and a DR400 version. So you can see on the top left here under presets, under each one of these folders, all the presets are there. And you'll see that there is variations to the tone curve adjustments, and that's what gives you that dynamic range. Now, obviously, it's not going to match the camera's settings exactly. What I did was I went and created images at these dynamic range settings, brought them in with the RAW, and matched them up as best I could in Lightroom. The difference being is that Lightroom will allow you to add these dynamic range adjustments with any ISO. So the camera requires that you are 2 stops over your base RAW ISO for DR400. You can be at ISO 160 and still avail of DR400. It'll increase your dynamic range. So it's like a starting point. So you decide, do you want to improve dynamic range off the bat before you make any adjustments when applying the simulation? You then go to DR400 and choose your simulation. So let me just open this up here. Some of the simulations are grayed out. You can't select them. And that's purely because in Lightroom, for some reason, some simulations match certain generations of cameras, some don't. There's like a version 1 and a version 2 of some of them. And I've labeled them accordingly. It doesn't really make a difference. You'll see the one that applies to the image that you're working on because it's highlighted, where the other ones are grayed out. But I just to show you that I've kind of made provisions for other cameras as well of previous generations. I've also included Fuji Chrome, which is the recipe I made in the Ettr Raw studio. What I did is I created the JPEG and I brought the image across into Lightroom with the RAW and I matched it up as best as possible. Only difference here is I've actually created 2. One is called as shot, meaning whatever your white balance was shot at the time, it'll just apply all the adjustments except for white balance. And the Fujichrome 50 daylight will apply a daylight color temperature to your image. I did the same for Xchrome 101, which was the other recipe that I created as well. So those are the 2 additional simulations I've added to your Lightroom presets. Going down on the left here, you'll see highlights and shadows. Just like the camera, which is a little bit counterintuitive, with your Lightroom shadow slider, you'll see on the right here, when you want to open up the shadows, you go right, you plus. When you want to darken the shadows, you go left, you minus. As you've noticed on the Fujifilm cameras, by minusing your shadow, you're opening up your shadow. By plussing your shadow, you're darkening it. What I've decided to do here, and I couldn't actually match it up, this is really just my take on highlights and shadows. It's not really relating too much to what the camera does. I've kept it like the camera, meaning if you minus your shadows, you will open them up as I'm doing here. And if you plus them, you darken them. Only difference is I've added a -3 and a -4 to shadows and a +3 and a +4, which is what's found in camera. But I've extended the minus because it only goes up to -2 in camera. Same with the highlights. You'll see in the minus category of the highlights, you'll see I've added a -3 and a -4 as well. And both have a 0, so you can zero out. So I've included a 0 if you want to go back to the starting point. Those will only adjust highlights and shadows as well as whites and blacks. So it's a combination of highlights and whites together, and it's a combination of shadows and blacks together when you adjust these. Next folder down is clarity, contrast, and sharpness. Pretty straightforward. I'm sure you all know what they are. I've again zeroed each one out, so you can zero it out. +1, +2, +3 for clarity. I haven't included a minus clarity. I don't see many people minusing clarity over a whole image. I can understand using a brush, but not the whole image. If that's something you do, all you do is you go create your own and then just add it to this group of presets. And contrast has got a -1 and a -2 in case you want to minus contrast a 0 as well, and then +1, +2, +3. Sharpness is 0, +1, +2, +3. I've done sharpening the way I normally do Fujifilm files in Lightroom. I know there's issues around sharpening. That's where the big issue is, in fact. And Capture One does a better job. The camera does the best job. But the way I've done it is a unique way. I sharpen my images in a particular way with Lightroom. This may or may not suit you, but I'm sharing it with you. So go have a look at that. Go see what it does to the image if you're happy with it. Otherwise, go create your own and just copy over these. And it's simple as that. Then you keep the sharpening that you want in the group. And lastly here, you see saturation and vibrance, both zeroed out. Both go +1 to +5. Pretty straightforward. If you're not happy with the amount that I've added for each one of these settings, if you want it more extreme, just go and change it yourself. Just go and create a new preset and delete the old one. So what you'll notice on the presets is that at the start of some of the names, I've got underscores and double underscores. That's only there really just to keep these in the order that I want them. Because Lightroom will put them into alphabetical order, it sort of sits them in an order that I don't think you should be working on them. But if you want to change that up, it's quite simple. You just go right click, rename, and you remove that and put it in the group order that you want. But that's the order I think you should be working on it. Now, obviously, if you take this into one of your mobile programs, I know that Lightroom Mobile CC on the iPad and the phone invert these. So even though I've gone and done these, it puts them in the opposite order. So you might need to rename those when you take it into Lightroom Mobile so that you have the correct ones at the top and the ones that you want to work on last at the bottom. Now, the last preset that I haven't spoken about is called Ettr Raw Only. Now, those of you who shoot RAW only and shoot in the way that we discussed on my last video about exposing to the right, if someone was to work on it, really preserving the highlights and trying to get as much information onto that sensor by pushing everything right on the histogram, this preset is for you. And what I've done is I've created a one-touch preset that's going to get your image to as close as being completed as possible. Now, it's not perfect. It actually is a little bit on the extreme side, meaning it's going to look a little bit extreme, but I've done that on purpose because I'd rather you work backwards. So once you select it, you can actually go to highlights and shadows and just make slight adjustments. Okay. I have it at the top because if you do opt to use it, that's the first thing you should press. So let's go and test that out now. Obviously, just before I start, you can see this image is, high level of contrast. This is the same shoot I was talking about earlier with Jamal, with the X Pro 3 shoot. Now I get an option to work on the actual RAW, where in that review I only had access to JPEGs. On the top right hand side, you can see the histogram. There's really only shadows and highlights in this. It's very contrasty. All your midtones are not there, but I've managed to keep everything within that, the histogram there. So I have preservation of highlights and shadows, which I'm really happy about. Remember, when you're shooting RAW only or shoot to edit, it's not about what the image looks like on your LCD. It's what you're capturing that counts. So let's go to the Ettr Raw Only preset. Let's select that. And as you can see, it's got quite a harsh, aggressive look to start off with. That's okay. Now, because I know it's very contrasty, I'm going to opt for DR400. You could probably go DR200, but let's go to DR400. So the next thing you do is you choose your simulation. Now, if you look on the right-hand side, you'll see it's classic neg, because that's what I shot it on the day, because I was demonstrating the new classic neg simulation. But I actually want to use my own Fujichrome 50 with as shot white balance. So let's select that. So you can see it's already softened it up because I've increased the dynamic range with DR400, but not quite where I want it. It still looks a little bit harsh. So let's go to highlights and shadows. Let's open that up. And I think that the highlights, let's just soften them up a little bit. So you can either go, at the moment it's quite high. So I think somewhere around -2 or -1 will suit. If you want that flat look, -1 might be better. If you want that sort of harder look, -2. You just select that, and that's pretty much the whole image. Now, included in the Ettr Raw Only preset, I've already added clarity, and I've already added, I think it's a +2 or 3 sharpness. But you can then go and make your own adjustment on the sharpness by using these, or contrast or clarity, whatever you select, it will adjust on the main image. Yeah, so I hope that helps people who hate editing and want to get the image sort of done as quickly as possible without messing around. This might get you into position faster if you had to use the sliders. I'm hoping it does. That's the point of why I did it. So let's just reset the image here and let's go do it again without using the RAW only one-touch preset. So let's go and actually build it up from the start. So I would go, because I know it's contrasty already, I'm going to go to DR400. Let's try my other preset here, the Xchrome. Let's go as shot. So I've selected that. That's immediately opened up the image a bit. I'm going to go to highlights and shadows. I'm going to go through the highlights. I don't want to show too, I don't want to make it look too flat. So I'm going to set it around -3. I'm happy with that. Let's go open up those shadows. I think that's pretty cool. I'm going to go to -4. Yeah, that's what I want, -4. Let's go add a little bit of clarity, just a little bit, +1. Contrast. I think we'll keep that at 0 because there's already contrast in the image. And let's go to sharpness +2. And let's just add a little bit of vibrance to it by going +2 on the vibrance. And that's pretty much it. That's the image. So I think that this will hopefully help for those of you who want to edit quickly without having to move sliders. That's the point of why I did it. It might not suit everyone, but I'm hoping it does help people, especially if you're using mobile. I think Lightroom Mobile might be a big help. You don't have to move those sliders on your iPad. You can just quickly go and touch the different settings that you want till the look you get. Now, there's one simulation that's missing, I couldn't bear to do it. I know some of you love that simulation. Every time I say sepia, oh, I try to make a sepia. Sorry, I can't say it. Whoa, it makes me nauseous when I think about that film simulation. I had to leave one simulation off the list. So you're going to have to guess what that simulation... Whew. I haven't made anything for Capture One. Sorry, guys. I will try at some stage to do that. I think it's called Styles in Capture One. I might download I've actually got the software on my computer. I might try and do it. It just took me a long time to do Lightroom. But I probably at some stage will do Capture One for you as well, and I'll share that with you in Styles. But yeah, just check them out. You can import them into your phone. So if you're using Lightroom CC, Lightroom Mobile CC, or your iPad, and I find that's actually the easiest, because now on the iPad, you load the preset in, and all you do on the right-hand side of your iPad is just image comes up, film simulation, highlights minus, shadow minus, whatever it is, clarity, contrast, boom, move to the next image, and then you can make a crop. And in a way, works better than Ettr Raw Studio, besides the fact that Ettr Raw Studio and the camera are using the camera to process is always going to give you the best JPEG. The Lightroom capability of being able to crop and do it just like sort of vignettes and things that you wouldn't have been able to do in camera are now available on your iPhone, iPad, or whatever phone and tablet you use, and Lightroom software. And that's it. I hope that information was helpful to you. I hope that the series that I've done through RAW and JPEG, 8-bit, 14-bit, color, profiles, film simulations, how to shoot RAW only, histogram, whatever, all these different things I've discussed over the last 3 videos. I hope it was a benefit to you, and it really changes the way you look at photographing. And you've made up, if you were sitting on the fence about certain things, that maybe this has given you a clear indication of the way you should shoot. That's my hope. I've had people reaching out to me to saying, listen, how can they support my channel, John, because you've benefited me through the information you've given. And I really do appreciate those gestures. Obviously, I always would like to exchange something if you ever were to support the channel. So whenever I'm giving presets or recipes and you find that those benefit you, they're not for sale. If it benefits you and you got something out of it, just drop a few bob in the PayPal account, which is in the description below. It will help the channel. It'll help grow the channel. Outside of that, I am looking to do different sort of methods of bringing income in for the channel because I want to grow it. I decided recently that I'm going to give a little bit more of a percentage of my time to the channel because I wanted to see that the channel responded in a particular way. Then I could go for it because I've got other work that I do. So if I take more time at this, that means I'm putting less time into something else. So I've decided I'm going to give more time towards the channel, and in doing so, I'm going to bring in some merchandise and just aspects that people can purchase. There's an exchange of some kind, and then my channel can benefit from that income as well. So thanks for sitting through this video with me. I do appreciate your time, and I know time is precious. If you like what you see in general, if you're new to the channel, go check out my other work. Go check out other videos I posted. Go check out the RAW versus JPEG and the RAW only video, which we've done before this. They're all connected to one another. Give you an overall better picture. Subscribe, like this video, thumbs up, do all those positive things, hit the bell icon. I don't even know what YouTube's doing in general anymore when it comes to notification, but do whatever you can. It does help the channel. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care and God bless.